Part 104. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1046. After becoming a guardian, Subai actually had a deeper understanding of the place of enlightenment. It is possible to attain enlightenment even if there is no place of enlightenment. For example, when Chen Ruyan Huiyang and others achieved enlightenment, the place of enlightenment had been sealed when they attained enlightenment. But it has no effect at all. This is a bit like a formality adopted by the government. Broadcasting, with its authority and characteristics, drives this formalism to become a norm that all listeners must abide by. Subtly, it is passed down from generation to generation and becomes a norm that everyone adheres to. Ceremony. But in fact, the place of enlightenment is actually of no use. It is nothing more than a collection room for broadcasting. Every person who has attained enlightenment has buried something. In fact, it is not a burial, but more like a kind of personal care for himself. Sustenance and the choice of the future path, but these things are also a kind of essence, a Tao that belongs to a person who has attained enlightenment along the way. Even when watching them on the radio, I want to collect them with relish. But it is precisely because of this characteristic that broadcasting takes great care of it. This is why the position of guardian of the place of enlightenment was born. Therefore, even when Chen Ru sneaked into the place of enlightenment in the east, she only wanted to steal a few tombstones. And when Subai got sick and prepared to smash all the tombstones, Chen Ru had to admit defeat, because she knew that this was the treasure of broadcasting. Once Subai destroyed them all because of her own affairs, broadcasting would not be able to. Maybe I'll turn a blind eye again. But what the fat man is doing now is actually no different from Subai preparing to smash the tombstone before he fell ill. The fat man used his own essence and blood to integrate into the formation to create the most powerful spiritual summoning formation that he could create at his current level of strength. According to the characteristics of this formation, all the souls or spiritual imprints left by the past enlighteners in the tombstones will be stimulated. They were originally barrels of old wine stored in the cellar. They were kept in a wine cellar buried deep underground in the place of enlightenment and continued to be nourished. Now, they are all opened and exposed to the air by the fat man. This is a wasteful way. So extravagant that it is heartbreaking, they cannot replenish themselves. After this riot, the remaining mental and soul imprints will also become much weaker. Some that are older or those who have attained enlightenment at that time are not strong enough or talented enough may directly collapse. Scattered. But after all, this is the place of enlightenment in the West, so Subai doesn't have any feelings. Anyway, after Hills comes, let him go to find Fatty and try his best. He won't be blamed for it, and he doesn't feel bad. The most important thing is what's more, Subai knew that at this time, broadcasting would no longer care about the collection room. This may be the reason why Fatty played this trick unscrupulously. What Subai was more interested in was, what would Fatty do if he took off his toy? There are thousands of tombstones here, and Fatty's hodgepodge has inspired them all. Even a big boss would feel scared and shocked standing here. Although Fatty has a lot of meat on his body, having more meat is not useful here. However, the fat man seemed very calm at this time. He who always cherished his own life must have been fully prepared if he dared to play so big this time. At that moment, he took out a jade ruyi and threw it in front of him. This piece of jade ruyi looks familiar to Subai. It should be where the remnant soul of Princess Daqin resided. Of course, the remnant soul should be gone now. Subai didn't ask how the fat man disposed of it. There is no need to get to the bottom of some things. If you are really persistent, it will hurt your feelings. The soul is back. The fat man is still solemn. Behind him, there seems to be a majestic figure standing. This is the ancestor that the fat man faked himself. I don't know which one of the three pure ones it is, but there is really such a thing. Feel. Subai was holding the little guy next to him and watching it with great interest. However, Subai had just arranged the magic circle that would be used to transport him back to the Eastern Prosecution Land. Faced with such a huge battle, let alone this place. This is the place of enlightenment in the West. Even Subai, who has the jade seal of the Dian kingdom in his hands in the place of enlightenment in the East, is not sure that he can really control this scene. The surroundings were full of devils dancing around, but Fatty was still having a great time. He was adding fuel to the fire, he was fanning the flames, and he still didn't think it was enough and he wasn't enjoying himself enough. Subai keenly discovered that Yuruyi, who was placed in front of him by the fat man, was grasping the origins of those spiritual imprints. Although the soul imprints and spiritual imprints left by the masters who had attained enlightenment were not very powerful, they still had some origins. After all, no one wants the tombstone they left here to turn into a mere tombstone after a period of time. And what the fat man stole was exactly those things. The origin of thousands of big guys, even if each portion is small, but when added up, it is still a considerable number. Looking at the red face of the fat man, you can tell how excited this guy is now. That piece of jade ruyi is indeed a very mysterious magic weapon. The magic weapon that used to be in the hands of the Princess of Qin was certainly not ordinary. Subai remembered that he had thrown this jade ruyi to the fat man, so it was considered as a direct gift to the fat man. It was thought that he was repaying the favor that the fat man had given him for the drop of ancient vampire essence and blood. Now that he thought about it, the fat man still took advantage. Forget it, just consider it as compensation for the black crematorium. At this time, Fatty must not have expected that Subai, who was sitting aside and watching the fun, could still have those sensitive words popping up in his mind, otherwise he would probably be so angry that he would go crazy immediately. Jade ruyi absorbs enough of its origin and shines brightly, like an empty bottle filled with water, pure and clear, and the radiance emitted by it can also give people a sense of peace and tranquility. The fat man also knew that it was time to stop. He shouted lowly and placed a dark golden talisman directly on his forehead. In an instant, the shadow of the ancestor behind the fat man was directly separated from him, and the surroundings were rippling. All the terrifying aura rushed towards the phantom, and the fat man took this opportunity and ran towards Subai with Yuruyi in his hand, shouting excitedly at the same time. It's done, ha ha ha, Dabai, it's done now, it's done. The fat man was very excited. The flesh on his body kept trembling as he ran, and he kept laughing with his mouth wide open. He looked like a fool weighing more than 300 pounds. Subai originally responded with a smile, but soon Subai realized that something was wrong. The phantom of the ancestor that Fatty left behind as a scapegoat was instantly annihilated by those majestic and terrifying soul powers after Fatty stopped presiding over the soul summoning array. And then all these consciousnesses roared out, pointing directly at the running fat man. They are not lonely ghosts, nor are they mountain spirits and wild monsters, nor are they chaotic spiritual consciousness. They have their own consciousness and their own pride. They are part of the legacy of the great master of Jendao. In the past, Boss Liang's third during a sermon, the tombstone was directly smashed by the lychee tombstone. Su Yuhang waved his hand and knocked Subai out of the underworld, which is enough to illustrate the principle of a 100-footed insect dies but does not freeze. The fat man also turned around in surprise. When he saw the overwhelming group of terrifying consciousnesses chasing him, he was so frightened that his face turned blue. Oh dear, a group of vicious boss figures behind him were staring at him and chasing him. He has been chasing these 300 people. The pound of meat is really not enough to chew on. Dabai, cover me, Fatty shouted to Subai. Apparently, he had lost his temper. Subai stood up and spread his palms. He tried to use the jade seal of the Dian kingdom, but the jade seal of the Dian kingdom seemed to be greatly suppressed in the western place of enlightenment. At that moment, Subai simply arranged an energy barrier in front of him, but think about it, the phantoms of the wolf-like bosses in front removed the barrier and jumped back to the teleportation circle area with the little guy in their arms. Fatty. The fat man held Yuruyi in his hand and ran as fast as he could. Subai activated the magic circle at the right time. When the fat man jumped onto the magic circle also started. Buzz. Subai and Fatty returned to the location of the coffins at the Eastern Enlightenment place. Subai changed the layout of the coffins without hesitation and fixed one of the coffins. At first, in order to prevent Hills from bothering him, he also tried fixing the coffin so that Hills could not teleport over. You must know that the opposite side is the phantom of a group of big guys. They even have a certain amount of wisdom and memory. Isn't it easy to create a teleportation circle? Hoo 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 hoo. The fat man lay on the ground and gasped, "I'm scaring the baby to death, I'm scaring the baby to death." But soon, the fat man looked at the plump jade ruyi in his hand and giggled again, "It's worth it, it's worth it, ha 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 ha, Fatty, I'm going to be awesome." At this moment, a white light flashed at the entrance. This was not the light from the teleportation circle, but from the entrance to the place of enlightenment, which meant that someone had come in. "Sue, dear Sue, you are amazing, I love you, Sue, you really broke the seal, OMG, that's awesome." Hills, who was wearing a suit, ran over very emotionally. It could be seen that he had a bumpy journey, and he must have been on his way at all costs after getting off the plane. "Sue, I went to the location you gave me first, and then a woman there told me that you were in Dali, so I came over immediately and found this place, the place of enlightenment. I think I miss this place so much." Subai wanted to say something, but didn't know how. "I'll go back and check out my place first." Hills couldn't wait to stand on the altar, preparing to teleport to his base camp. The fat man swallowed and took a few steps back. Subai also hesitated and gave up control of the formation. Hills adjusted the angle and activated the formation. "Sue, I have brought a lot of red wine. I will come over later and invite you to taste it together." As soon as he finished speaking, Hill's figure disappeared on the altar. The fat man pondered for a moment and asked, "Dabai, are the consequences serious?" Subai did not answer, but raised his head and looked at the bronze mirror above. Hill's figure appeared in the bronze mirror. Then only an angry roar was heard. "What the hum?" Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1047. When Hills teleported back again, his whole body was in a state of embarrassment and scarred. He rushed over in a hurry and wanted to return to where he was before, but reality gave him a very loud slap in the face. This slap made Subai feel a little hurt for Hills. What is the most important and precious thing about the place of enlightenment? It's nothing more than a tombstone buried under hundreds of years of enlightenment by successive generations. The demons currently dancing in the western land of enlightenment have been stolen by Fatty in an extremely insignificant way. They are like setting off fireworks. Although they are so brilliant now, after the blooming is over, the thousands of demons in the western land of enlightenment it is unknown how many tombstones are left that can continue to shine. Hills looked at Subai first. Subai was holding the little guy beside him and shrugged, indicating that the matter had nothing to do with him. But in fact, how could it have nothing to do with him? If he hadn't brought the fat man in, it is impossible for the fat man to go to the Western Enlightenment land to play such a trick. But Subai knew clearly that Hills needed to vent his anger, so let him go to the fat man. Anyway, the fat man was thick-skinned, so it was right for him to beat him up. After the night at the crematorium, Subai felt that nothing in the world could defeat Fatty. After all, if you think about it from another person's perspective, if the place of enlightenment in the East was ruined like this, Subai would definitely become angry and sick. The fat man swallowed, not daring to look at Hill's angry gaze. "You." Hills pointed at the fat man. Next moment, A long sword appeared in Hill's palm, and in an instant, murderous intent burst out. The terrifying sword slashed directly at the fat man. Although the fat man felt a little guilty, he was not willing to sit here and be beaten passively. He immediately moved away and subconsciously took out the talisman to prepare for a counterattack. It's just that Hill's sword strikes came and went, seemingly endlessly. The fat man who planned to fight back found that he had no room to fight back at all, and could only passively take the beating. "Bye-bye, save me." The fat man shouted for help. "It's too stuffy here, let's go out and get some air." Subai hugged the little guy and prepared to leave, leaving plenty of space for Fatty and Hills to love each other. Hills could easily deal with the current fat man, but when he saw that Subai was about to leave and become an innocent person, he was still so angry that he pointed the other sword at Subai. Subai's eyes condensed, and his aura burst out. At the same time, the Dian Kingdom's Jade Seal floated up, bringing a suppressive power. The Jade Seal of the Dian Kingdom is the symbol of the guardian of the Eastern Enlightenment land. In this place, it has unparalleled power bonus. "What, you want to fight with me?" Subai looked at Hills with a smile. The audience's rules of survival are actually very simple and straightforward. If you slander others today, they will slander you tomorrow. Another rule is that if you don't do it for yourself, you will be destroyed by heaven and earth. Although Subai felt that Fatty's hand almost destroyed the path to enlightenment in the West. The foundation of the earth caused Hills to suffer great losses, but at that time, Subai was actually watching the fat man busy and did not stop him, because from the bottom of his heart, Subai did not feel that the fat man was really wrong to do this. Hills's chest rose and fell. He glanced at the fat man who was being beaten around by the flying sword he controlled, and said directly, "I want half of the origin in that jade." "Catch," Fatty shouted. "Okay, okay." Then Hills looked at Subai. "When I prove the truth, I can only come to you to prove it." "It's an honor," Subai agreed. Hills looked at the fat man again, his eyes on the jade ruyi in the fat man's hand. The fat man looked at Subai. Subai nodded to the fat man. The fat man reluctantly threw Yuruyi to Hills first. After the deal was agreed, Hills waved his palm and put away both swords. He was very angry, even so angry that he wanted to kill someone, because the murderous intention just now could not be faked. The fat man now only has poor initial strength. For Hills, who was already a senior, he didn't take it seriously at all, but Hills didn't dare to completely fall out with Subai and the others at this time and in this place. He could see that Subai was only at the middle level of strength, but not long ago Subai came to the west with another Oriental woman to kill a lot and then left leisurely. He knew that Subai's strength could not be simply measured by rank. In addition, this is the territory of the East, and it is also the place of enlightenment in the East, which is equal to Subai's natural home ground. "I need to calm down." Hill sat down next to a coffin, dragging his chin with one hand. The fat man ran to the underworld to find the monk and the Buddha. He didn't dare to stay with Hills for too long, and with Subai's guarantee, he wasn't too worried that Hills would take his life away. "Your identity will be hacked. Of course, the most important thing is that you are not strong enough, otherwise the fat man will rob you. So what? Fatty knows when to pretend to be a grandson." Subai hugged the little guy and sat down in front of Hills. The kid kept looking at Hills' legs, but today Hills was wearing long casual pants, so he couldn't see them. Your son is very cute." Hills smiled slightly and seemed to have restrained his previous anger. This surprised Subai. Although Hills had given people a very unreliable and restless feeling for a long time, this time, Hills handled the previous events so quickly and calmly, which proved his state of mind. The groundwork has almost been laid. Subai even doubted whether this guy had actually been able to attain enlightenment a long time ago and was just waiting to return to the place where he wanted to attain enlightenment. After all, when we first became guardians together, Hill's strength level was much higher than mine. In terms of talent, Hill's was actually a little higher than mine, but we all took different paths, so there's no way to make a specific comparison. You have to know that if the incident in Shijiazhuang hadn't eliminated the opportunity to break through to the high level, now I would also be a high-level listener. Call uncle. Subai grabbed the little guy's little hand and shook it at Hills. The little guy continued to look at Hill's legs. This doesn't look like your painting style, Su, you're actually holding a child. Hills looked around, as if looking for the figure of the fat man. When I first came in, I was struck by your weird painting style. Shocked. Everyone needs to leave some space for themselves in their hearts. Yes, my own place in my heart. Hills smiled. Su, you still know how to play. If I had known this method earlier, I would have gone to the orphanage to adopt a little girl, and then according to your Oriental traditional customs, we would have. Can you order a baby kiss? That's the word, right? Haha. Subai ignored Hill's rhetoric and confirmed again, are you really okay? Hills shook his head, I'm still angry after all, but no matter what, this matter can't be changed. The result is already determined, isn't it? But I don't think you can look away so freely, unless you are really detached. Su, let me show you something. As he said that, Hills took out a few scrolls. Subai didn't know what they were, because there was no obvious specific energy aura on the scrolls. Do you know why I rushed to the place of enlightenment? Hills asked. The roads are different and the choices are different, but they all need to borrow this place and take advantage of the environment here. Hills seemed a little surprised when he heard Subai's explanation, because the two parties knew each other well and were familiar with each other. They could be considered as brothers sleeping in my upper bunk kind of relationship. Therefore, Hills learned from Subai's words. Hearing another meaning, he said somewhat meaningfully. Su, it seems that your ambition is much greater than mine. Then it looks like the roads are indeed different. You are lucky, there is a template for you to follow. Hills stood up lazily, playing with the jade ruyi handed over by the fat man in his hand, then pointed to the scrolls he had just taken out and said, I just regard this place as a treasure. Since the broadcasters have changed, the rules of broadcasting have also changed, and the concepts have also changed, then this sacred place that no one dared to desecrate has become a place for people like us to guard and steal. Best place to go. These scrolls contain specific spirit gathering arrays. So. A smile appeared on Subai's lips, and he felt a little sympathy for the fat man. Yes, I originally came here with the idea of the origins under these tombstones. Broadcasting no longer pays attention to this place. Why should I continue to protect this place like a treasure? For hundreds of years, there are thousands of tombstones, and it's a pity that what remains of their origins has been left there. It's better to give them to me for use. Moreover, your friend's method is really powerful. According to my original estimate, the amount of origin I can capture may only be 1/10 of what this jade ruyi currently stores. Now, even if we are evenly divided with your friend, it is also 5 times more than before. Yes, Subai nodded. Since Hills explained it like this, he felt relieved. Otherwise, he would always worry that Hills would suddenly go crazy and chop up the fat man. Can you tell me which way you want to go, Su? Hills crossed his fingers, I'm really curious. There is a yellow spring here, Subai said. I know that in your Eastern cultural system, Huanquan is a symbol of reincarnation and a place where the dead go. Subai stretched out his hand and pointed forward, saying, the yellow spring here has no end and no origin. It keeps flowing, and flows in cycles. So, Hills indicated that he was listening carefully. Here, I want to find my past, and at the same time, I also want to see my future clearly. The little guy clapped, as if he was cheering for his father's speech. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 1048. On the quiet and beautiful Erhai Lake, two men are leaning on a deck chair, drinking beer, and looking into the distance. The lake surface is like a huge piece of amber, the sky is high, the clouds are clear, and the mountains are vast. This life is very comfortable and comfortable. The little guy lay on Sudbai's belly and glanced at Hill's legs from time to time. Well, Hills came out of the place of enlightenment and changed into big pants and lay there lazily basking in the sun. The little guy looked at Hill's legs, then at his own little legs, and finally at his father's legs. Then the little guy seemed to let out a long sigh of relief. Dad's legs are as smooth as his own. What is your son looking at? Hills asked with interest. Have no idea. Sudbai patted the little guy's butt. Why did he feel that his son was being led astray? Su, it's not easy for you to take that road. Even if the broadcasting industry is in bad luck right now, and even it itself is on the verge of collapse, have you ever thought about it? Just like the theory given by many events in history from the perspective of the superior is the most urgent. The need is to first eliminate internal instability factors. What Hill said is somewhat similar to Mr. Chiang Kai-shek's saying, in order to deal with foreign affairs, we must first settle our domestic affairs. I'm different. I'm not following the cause and effect. Sudbai picked up the wine glass and took a sip. The sun was shining brightly, the lake breeze was blowing gently, and there were young female tourists riding bicycles, alone or in groups, from time to time on the path ahead. The outside world is indeed much more attractive than the sameness of the land of enlightenment, but the land of enlightenment has its own unique charm. Then I don't understand. In fact, I have always thought that the reason why cause and effect becomes a gap and becomes a big fear is that on the one hand, it may be because its height is too high, similar to what ordinary people can't imagine. That kind of philosophical height can make you doubt life, doubt the value of survival, and eventually lead to self-destruction. Just like a person living in the Middle Ages suddenly got an astronomical telescope and discovered how small his own planet is compared to the entire universe. His worldview is very small. It may collapse directly, because his endurance is simply no better than that of a primary school student in today's society. Another reason is probably cause and effect, which is the basis of broadcasting rules. Broadcasting relies on the consciousness built up by cause and effect. If broadcasting is compared to a computer, or to a program, then cause and effect are the codes and operating rules that build the program. Therefore, the radio will not allow the cabbage it has planted to be able to master terrible weapons that can destroy its own foundation, just like when the United States said that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. The biggest reason is because Saddam wants to abandon the US dollar settlement of domestic oil and switch to euro settlement, right? Sudbai smiled and said, then Gaddafi said that not only should he give up the US dollar oil settlement, but also not the euro settlement, but use gold to settle it, and then it was beaten by the United States and the European Union. Su, you were in business before, right? I said it was before you became an audience, Hills asked. Sudbai nodded, recalling the years when he was the eldest son. It seemed like a long time ago. Hills actually didn't know that his so-called analysis was actually infinitely close to the truth. Of course, it only existed in the conversation between Mr. Zhao and Su Yuhang and had not really spread. Then what are you looking for? What do you want to see? Hills brought the topic back. What I want to retrieve is my past, my own past, because my past is incomplete. Although the memories have been retrieved and integrated, I have not really lived in the past. I also want to see if my future will break the shackles and fate. I want to see what the outcome will be for the two people who gave birth to me. Hills nodded thoughtfully. It's really not cause and effect, it's just proof of one's life. When are you going to prove it? The origin has been obtained, it should be soon, Sudbai asked. No hurry, no rush, "What are you doing in such a hurry?" Hills whistled at the two female tourists who had just passed by on the path. His appearance as a handsome foreign man really attracted the attention of girls. This was not a sign of admiration for foreigners. Flirting, she is indeed good looking. Of course, Subai is not bad looking, but most of the women in the past still focus on Hills, probably because Subai has a child. No matter how handsome a man with a child is, for women, after all, I lost some points, especially in Delhi, which is known as the paradise for romance. If you are a man holding a baby next to you, you will definitely lose a lot of unnecessary thoughts. Sue, I like this place, I like the tranquility here, and I also like the reserved and unrestrained women here. Hills stretched out his arms and sighed, "This is life, this is the original nature of this damn life. How it should look." "So you like women?" Subai said thoughtfully. Hills. "How long do your two friends need to realize?" Hills asked, saying that he liked to talk quietly and that he was not in a hurry, but the temptation of enlightenment was indeed great, and Hills naturally felt a little dissatisfied with his integrity. "It will probably take a while," Subai estimated. "Anyway, I'm really not in a hurry. I was just pulled into the story world not long ago. Now, I can enjoy this time with my son." After hearing this, Hills stopped struggling and lay back down again. The two grown men continued to enjoy the sunbathing here. However, the calm didn't seem to last long. About half an hour later, when Subai felt that the little guy lying on his chest began to snore slightly. Far away from the horizon. Suddenly there was a special throbbing. Hills sat up first, looking towards the sky with bright eyes. Subai silently stroked the little guy's back. "Familiar smell, familiar voice." Hills sighed, "It's the train is back." "This is expected," Subai immediately added, "it's just that it's a little early this time." Yes, the train is destined to come again, because Subai, who has really seen the strength of the armored man, knows that once the 500 evil stars over there are successfully awakened, it will be difficult to escape with the number and strength of Lizzie's gang. Those old Chin people are seeking revenge. However, the train came back 2 years earlier than expected, because now the total number of big guys from the east and the west is only 5. Generally speaking, according to broadcasting habits, about 70 or 80 big guys will gather together and then a train will pull them. In the past, no matter whether there was Li Ji in charge or there were powerful listeners who were as powerful as Li Ji, it was still a situation that was difficult to survive alone. After all, that is a Chin army. They will not compete with you one-on-one. 500 people are enough for them to form a military formation. That is the most terrifying thing. So if the train is coming back this time to pull people in, isn't sending them there a few at a time just a pure fueling tactic? Of course, there is actually another possibility. No, the sound of the train disappeared again. Hills frowned. Just now, not only himself, but also Subai beside him had sensed it, so there was absolutely nothing wrong with the return of the train. But now I can no longer feel the breath of the train, as if something unexpected happened on the way back. Subai put the little guy on the bench and stood up. The figures of the fat man and the monk also appeared in the Urhai lake in the distance. Obviously, they were also alarmed. There was something wrong with the train and it was blocked on the way back. Subai analyzed, it was like lightning and thunder. Haha, it would be interesting if that were really the case. Hills took a deep breath, but I don't know what the outcome will be. But one result is nothing more than the broadcast withdrawing the people of that world to prevent their complete annihilation, because in the past, the broadcasters treated the listeners with a cannon fodder mentality. Now, he can no longer afford it, and he started cherish it. Another result is that the audience over there has been killed by the Chin army. It is the Chin army who want to take the train back to their home world. This is actually the worst possibility, because it means that there is simply no time to slowly strengthen and practice, and you will soon face the most brutal bloody storm, unless the broadcast pulls all listeners into the story world for protective cultivation, but this should be impossible. Of course, there is another possibility between the two, that is, the radio wanted to bring the remaining listeners back to save them, but encountered the Qin army's interception. Now, whether the remaining listeners can really come back alive is still unclear. It's hard to say. Fat Master, I still remember that when the train came back, there were only dead people and a bunch of things that looked like alien creatures in science fiction movies. I'm afraid it will be similar this time, right? The fat man was quite happy about his misfortune. No matter what the possibility is, we just need to wait for the result. The big guys who are still here should take the initiative to check the situation after speaking, Buddha returned to the bottom of the water again. Obviously, his understanding of the underworld is still there. It's not over. The monk also smiled slightly, turned around and followed the Buddha down. Yes, they cannot influence the situation unless they are enlightened early. The fat man looked at Hills first and saw that he was no longer angry. He immediately ran to Sudbai and sat down. He picked up the beer and drank it. He only glanced at Hills from time to time. Sri Lanka. Sudbai knew what Fatty was worried about. He was afraid that Hills would swallow all the origins that he had risked his life to get. Su, when I came here, I saw a nice bar nearby. Would you like to join us in the evening? There is a black jazz band that will be singing there these days. It is quite famous in the West. Sudbai shook his head and pointed at the fat man. He's familiar, let him accompany you. Bar, okay, what? The fat man suddenly realized, and immediately began to shake his head. I'm not going. This gesture seemed to have been good for a long time. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1049. What song is this? It sounds very cheerful, Fatty asked Sudbai while drinking his drink. In fact, everyone did not go to the bar, but Hills held an open-air KTV conference by Urhai Lake and lit a bonfire illegally, attracting many nearby tourists to stop here. Drinks are free here, and there are three. The first batch of managers who came to ask questions had fallen asleep directly in the background. A high-level listener doesn't kill people, doesn't engage in destruction, doesn't engage in religion, and just wants to have a small open-air party. This is a small request that even the broadcaster can't bear to refuse. One of Us is a classic from singer Joan Osborne's debut album Relish. Sudbai took a sip of wine. Hyle's family was very wealthy before he became a listener. He was considered an aristocrat. I also formed a band myself. Oh, it does look very classy. When the song ended, the fat man clapped his hands and applauded. But it doesn't feel that grounded. Looking around, the fat man saw the eating and drinking men and women gathered around him. Thinking about the environment here, it seems that the people here don't need such a thing as earth energy. Dabai, do you know, in my eyes, what is the most beautiful music? Fatty suddenly asked melancholy. The music band in rural areas. Sudbai gave the answer without hesitation. Huh, the fat man looked at Sudbai in surprise, held Sudbai's hand with one hand, and sighed in a drunken state. Bai, you understand me. Sudbai took out his hand and wiped it with a tissue on the table. His disgust was beyond words. It's a pity that even in rural areas nowadays, there are fewer and fewer such casual bands. The feeling of using broken speakers and inferior microphones and singing "Go Home" often at someone's funeral is slowly disappearing. It will become a memory of the past. The more Fatty talks, the more disappointed he becomes. Perhaps, this is Fatty's own dream and his true obsession. Before becoming a listener, he was a simple man in the countryside below Sichuan. He even went through the process of training before becoming a senior listener. The fat man even went back to his old job and started a new team. I have a dream, the fat man suddenly roared. Sudbai knew that he was pretending to be drunk, because alcohol could not paralyze them now. Martin Luther King is a black man. Sudbai suddenly interrupted. Ahem. The fat man rolled his eyes at Subai aggrievedly, and the lyrical atmosphere disappeared immediately. Hills quickly entered the second song. He was like a McMaster, not democratic at all, but he sang really well, especially the authentic British accent singing English songs, at least for the audience present. No less than an audio-visual feast. The little guy sat on Subai's lap, looking around from time to time, and shouting ba 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 from time to time. It was obvious that he was quite excited. You think I'm mentally ill, you think I'm seriously ill. Go tell the psychiatrist that I'm not normal. Exhausted, give me a fatal blow. But you like it best when I lose my mind. Let me tell you a secret, I am not afraid of anything. So what if I'm insane? All great people are a little crazy. People with skills are a little crazy, and everyone with skills is like this. This song is interesting and touching. The fat man shook his head and moved to the rhythm, then took out his cell phone and asked, "What kind of song is this?" Mad Hatter. Subai handed the little guy to Fatty and then stood up and walked away for a while. He suddenly felt a little upset. It was not caused by Hill's singing, but the kind of feeling that came from deep in his soul. Restless. It would be great if Ying Yinger was here at this time. This may be the case for men. Even if Suner is very close to him, the two parties have already maintained that distance and tacit understanding, and there is no longer any possibility of involvement, and Ying Yinger's this kind of caring and irresponsible freedom seems to be what is really scarce in life. Subai suddenly thought that the broadcast would no longer recruit experiencers, so if he took Ying Yinger with him, he would not have the same worries as before. However, it seems a bit too selfish to bring people back from the United States simply to satisfy your own needs. But who cares? Donor, I see desire in your eyes. The voice came from behind. Subai turned around and saw a young novice monk standing there in clean clothes, chanting the Buddha's name to himself with his hands clasped together. This little novice monk looks a little familiar. Subai remembered that when he first came to Delhi, he met this little novice monk in AB/U0026B. The little novice monk once told him that there were no saints in this world. What a coincidence! Subai handed over the beer in his hand. Want a sip? The young novice licked his lips, but still shook his head and said, Master said that drinking alcohol will cause trouble. Drink it, and I'll find you a beautiful girl. Subai bent down towards the little novice monk so that he could look at her level. The vampire's eyes held a strange evil charm, as if they were the simplest and most direct temptation in the world. In fact, the vampires have been able to survive and reproduce, and under the background of the darkness being defeated by the light camp, being good at tempting humans is also a major reason. Of course, this was different from Xie ultimate illusion, but Subai felt that teasing the little novice in front of him was enough. The little novice monk seemed to become vulnerable under Subai's gaze. His eyes began to become cloudy, and the original clarity disappeared. He could only be taken to the ditch by Subai, the bad uncle, and drank directly. Go for half a bottle of wine. Little sister, little sister. The little novice monk who couldn't drink enough was already swaying. Subai smiled and patted this guy's head. This guy was destined to him. He saw him last time and saw him this time. Of course, he was different from Su Yuxuan. Su Yuxuan was a soul boy, and this little novice monk was just an ordinary little monk. Monk. Subai is not an old rich man, he cannot see past and present, but sometimes it seems boring to be omniscient and omnipotent. To a certain extent, old rich man is actually very different from the broadcaster who wanted to die and therefore deliberately gave his position to Su Yuhang and his wife. Similarly, they all feel that their lives are boring. He took out some money from his pocket and stuffed it into the little novice's bag. Subai smiled and signaled to the little novice that he could go. He should be here to ask for alms. However, Subai didn't know which temple he came from, nor who his master was. Little sister, little sister. The little novice walked back happily, and then stopped at the Urhai lake. Sudbai looked at him. After all, he teased him to drink the wine. What if this guy accidentally fell into the river and drowned? Interesting now. Little sister. The little novice monk kept coughing and talking to himself. Then he suddenly fell silent. His silence seemed a bit strange to Sudbai, because at this moment, the little novice monk's whole temperament seemed to change. Changed. Sudbai walked over, and the little novice monk turned his head slightly and looked at Sudbai. From his eyes, Sudbai saw a trace of old age, as if he had seen through the vicissitudes of life. Boy, it's not a good idea to teach children to break the precepts. It's too damaging. The little novice's voice still sounds childish, but his tone and style of speaking are like that of an old man. I really didn't realize that you are still living in someone else's body. They have their own lives. Isn't it harming you to live in someone else's body? Sudbai asked back. It's a joke. I am his ancestor. Of course I have to stay and protect his lineage. This child has wisdom and cannot be allowed to die young. The voice sounded a bit serious. Yes, this kind of people usually take their inheritance very seriously. He cares about her even more than he cares about his own children. Because the heirs inherit their own blood, and their disciples inherit their own spirit and thoughts. Some people think that the preservation of bloodline is crucial, while others think that the light of their own thoughts is the key to their eternal existence. Are you also a listener? Sudbai asked, a listener who has died long ago. Hey, kid, old monk, can't I be an accomplished monk? You didn't even ask the audience what it was. Sudbai laughed. The old monk was stunned for a moment and said, you actually tricked me. The little novice monk looked at Sudbai carefully from top to bottom, and then said with a sigh, it's a pity, old monk, I died on the battlefield in another world, and now there is only one wisp left. The residual regret is that I read scriptures to the child every day while he was sleeping, but I didn't catch up with him when he was rich. Sudbai was non-committal. You and your father are really alike, the old monk suddenly added, his fortune falls on you, father and son. This is indignation from the perspective of a friend. Indeed, the old monk is right. Old Fugui was first tricked by Su Yuhang, and then gave up the chance of rebirth for his so-called godson. It was tantamount to being tricked by both father and son. You are not begging for help, Sudbai said calmly. The little novice monk was speechless for a moment. Yes, Sudbai was right. Normally, the old monk could only chant sutras and talk about Buddhism to the little novice monk in his dreams. But this time, he came out, which means that his split soul, there is no way it can continue to exist. Help me take good care of him, old monk. I know, there is no cause and effect to make him an audience now. I can find him a master monk, a master no lower than you, but there are conditions. Conditions? The little novice monk was angry. I am your uncle. When I was with your father and your godfather, they all had to call me brother. Condition? You kid, do you have to have the same moral character as your father? Condition? No. Then I will kill him later so that you can never succeed. The little novice monk said, I passed nirvana before I went to that world and left a relic. I can tell you the location as a condition for you. Deal. Sudbai took another sip of wine and said with a smile, the master I found for your disciple is the reincarnation of monk Huiguo. How about it? He's not worse than you, right? You two, father and son, are carved from the same mold, the little novice monk said angrily. The old monk only has that little thing, and yet you want to have his bones knocked out and his marrow sucked out. Okay, you can talk to your disciple again, you are about to disappear. Sudbai turned around and walked away. Standing on the shore of Urhai Lake. Under the darkness of night. The front is empty and empty. Just like my past. Just like my own future. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 1050. Liang Sen never thought that his original life would become so bad. No, to be precise, it cannot be described as bad, but chaotic. Even when Ji Zhen was sealed in the Qinhuangdao submarine cave, Boss Liang was not like this. Been upset. Xie Zhen was sitting there peeling an apple, but the apple was not handed to him, but to the empty chair in front of him. This made Boss Liang feel very depressed. From Xie Zhen's perspective, he made up a fictional version of himself, feeding him apples and asking if they were sweet and crispy. Boss Liang really wanted to say a curse word, Mother Zipai. Well, Boss Liang really feels like he has been cheated on now, even though the person who cheated on him is also him. While Boss Liang was watching TV, Xie Zhen sat on the balcony delivering newspapers and cocktails. While Boss Liang was sitting on the balcony reading the newspaper, Xie Zhen ran to prepare the steak and kept talking to himself at the dining table. Boss Liang felt that he could no longer stay in this home. It was filled with the sour smell of dog food. The atmosphere in the originally peaceful home suddenly became very strange. But he can't leave. Firstly, this is his home, and secondly, he is responsible for Xie Zhen becoming like this. If it weren't for his wavering, Xie Zhen wouldn't have encountered so many things. If he had been decisive in the beginning, giving Fusu's ring to Subai and the others would not cause so much trouble. To be honest, although he was angry under the sea of Qinhuangdao and even refused to give Su Yuhang face, Boss Liang did not think that this could make up for all his shortcomings. So he has to continue to stay at home. Moreover, Boss Liang's understanding of illusion is not deep, and he is not strengthened in this area, so he is really worried about what will happen to Xie Zhen after he virtualizes a non-existent person. Will not fall into it. Having a virtual counterparty becomes a virtual self. Now Ji Zhen is still moving, can cook, iron clothes, and react in the real world, but this does not mean that after a period of time, Ji Zhen can continue to maintain this kind of behavior in the real world. Normal. You must know that the virtual self is fake after all, and it may gradually become that situation. Xie Zhen no longer needs to rely on activities in the real world to communicate with the virtual self. He can just sit there or lie down. There was no movement there, because this did not prevent him from having any interaction with his virtual self. This is where Boss Liang is most nervous. But now it is a pity that among the listeners in the real world, not to mention a few big guys, they are not strengthened in this aspect, and other listeners who are strengthened in illusion are not even high-end, so it is impossible to take Xie Zhen away from that virtual character. On the contrary, it is very likely that Xie Zhen will lead you away and you will not be able to distinguish the boundary between reality and virtuality. Boss Liang did not dare to forcefully wake up Xie Zhen himself. This was like a person in a hypnotic state. Any accident could have terrible consequences. The first day passed awkwardly. The second day finally passed so awkwardly. On the third day, Boss Liang felt that he should do something. He tried to iron the pajamas by himself, and then waited to see. Sure enough, when Xie Zhen picked up the ironed pajamas, he seemed a little surprised. He didn't iron them again and put them on the hanger in his bedroom. This means that Xie Zhen is still aware of changes in the outside world. In other words, the only thing he can't see is probably himself, because there is already a self in his field of vision, so people subconsciously feel that there will never be another person who is exactly the same. In the evening, Boss Liang tried to cook dinner by himself, but after entering the kitchen, he found that he couldn't cook it at all. Dinner really became a problem for him as a boss. He ordered takeout, and he ordered Western food. Then he placed the food plates in the kitchen. When Xie Zhen entered the kitchen to prepare dinner, he seemed a little surprised by the food that had appeared. Boss Liang stood at the door and watched carefully. Then he saw Xie Zhen and shook his head. This is takeaway without sincerity. The boss doesn't like eating this kind of food without sincerity. Afterwards, Xie Zhen threw away all these things and started to make them again. Boss Liang, who was standing at the door, wished he could slap himself twice for being so naughty. The next day, Boss Liang took the recipe and started to learn how to make it by himself. A simple Chinese meal, consisting of stir-fried pork, stewed eggs, fried phoenix tails, and shredded mustard pork soup. Although it was his first time making it, Boss Liang put a lot of thought into it and chose simple dishes. This time, Boss Liang saw that he didn't throw away all the dishes. Instead, he tasted some and brought all the dishes to the table. Although Xie Zhen was still talking to himself next, and although Xie Zhen still couldn't see himself, Boss Liang felt that he seemed to have succeeded. When going to bed at night, Xie Zhen first went into the boss's bedroom and brought a cup of hot milk. Then Boss Liang went to Xie Zhen's bedroom and brought a cup of hot milk and placed it on the bedside. The next morning, Boss Liang got up early to take a look and found that the milk on the bedside had been drunk. Call. Boss Liang breathed a sigh of relief. In the next few days, Boss Liang tried to do more things. It seemed that the identities and roles of the two people had been reversed. In the past, all the work was done by the subordinates. Boss Liang himself almost took on most of the work. Although he felt a little tired, he also felt a little tired. Dull. If Boss Liang had to make his own choice, he would still prefer to sit on a wicker chair and read the newspaper and enjoy a series of services from Xie Zhen, including food and clothing. But now, looking at what he has done, which seems to be changing Xie Zhen's life trajectory in reality little by little, Boss Liang still feels that it is worth it. That evening, the sun was setting in the west. It was still very cold in Shanghai, which had already entered winter, but Xie Zhen was still sitting on the balcony, peeling an orange in his hand. Boss Liang was sitting next to him with a plastic bench. It was obvious that he was supposed to be sitting on the wicker chair. In fact, from Xie Zhen's perspective, it was indeed him who was sitting on the wicker chair. But now he has become an outsider. Boss, it's time to get your clothes, Xie Zhen said to the empty wicker chair in front of him. Every once in a while, Xie Zhen would go to a tailor shop to customize clothes for his boss and himself. Boss Liang still sat there without moving. Anyway, he knew that it was not him who was talking to Ji Zhen. You look good in a black suit, and you look more reserved. Burgundy. That should be my color match, Xie Zhen was talking to himself again. Just as Boss Liang was getting impatient and ready to go back to his room to drink milk and go to bed early, he suddenly found that the topic of Xie Zhen and virtual self began to change. Painting style, no. Talking style. Becoming a little weird. She should be fine. She is so powerful. Even if the 500 Qin soldiers over there wake up, nothing will happen to her. You can rest assured, boss. Huh. There is a situation. Boss Liang pricked up his ears. He immediately smelled something wrong. Probably because he was a participant in the past and would not notice the subtle abnormalities in Xie Zhen's words. However, recently, he has been just a bystander. There is a saying that bystanders know the authorities and those who are confused are like this. Boss Liang saw a little change in Xie Zhen's tone and expression. Then what else can you do? If the train doesn't come back, you can't go to that place and you can't help her, right? Boss Liang stood up and looked at Xie Zhen. Xie Zhen didn't see him and was still talking to his virtual self. Actually, in other words, boss, isn't this all your choice? If you had chosen to take the train to that world, you would have been able to stand with her. You could have also been able to deal with this incident and danger. Facing it with her, you don't have to sit here worrying for nothing but being powerless and unable to do anything, right? I know she has a very important place in your heart, and I also know that you have never forgotten her. No matter how she uses you, insults you, ignores you, you interpret this as love, but I always feel that you are so kind of love is a reflection of your own character. Your love, like yours, is also cautious and cautious. I know you don't like to hear these words, but there is no other way. If Li Qi died there, you might as well buy her a tomb. Suddenly, when Boss Liang saw this, the left side of his face turned red, revealing a slap mark. Is this the virtual self that just slapped someone in the face? Damn it! Boss Liang now wants to strangle that virtual self to death. Thinking consciousness can affect the human body, such as the blindfolded blood drop death experiment and the like, which all illustrate this point, and Xie Zhen completely treats the virtual Liang Sen as a real person, so even virtual things and actions will still be reflected and fed back on him. This is not the first time you have hit me for her. Xie Zhen was not angry and still looked very calm. Actually, I never want to see you looking decadent and cowardly, because in my eyes, you are very majestic, also very great. I have always regarded you as my big tree. When I start to grow bigger and bigger, I hope that this big tree will also grow bigger and bigger, but I don't hope that one day I will look back and suddenly find, this big tree turned out to be not as big as I imagined. You should cheer up. Since you chose not to get on the train, you don't need to feel sorry for her safety now. At this time, Boss Liang, who was sitting next to him as the third party, finally couldn't sit anymore and shouted. Damn it, I didn't take the train because I couldn't bear to leave you alone in this world, not for her. Oh, really? Boss Liang was suddenly stunned. Then he found that Xie Zhen actually turned around and looked at what he said. He. Can he see himself? PS1, a pair of people from one generation to another in a lifetime, fighting for love and ecstasy in two places. If they miss each other but don't fall in love with each other, no one will be happy. From Painting Spring by the Qing Dynasty poet Nailan Zengde. PS2. You. Can you see that you still have a monthly pass? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1051. This was a battle with a small number of people, but this battle created a scene comparable to a million-level melee. In 2 days, the sky was dark and the earth was shaking. There is no exaggeration here. The small Kukan was originally not a well-known city in this world because it had a small population, a small area, and a small wall. It was not the birthplace of any religion or belief. But it is very likely that from now on, it will become an indispensable landmark in many mythological systems, similar to Mount Olympus in another world. Countless mortals will recite this terrible battle between gods, and the legend will be passed down from generation to generation. When good people in later generations compile it into shape, the so-called mythological system will be constructed. At this time, Kukan was still the same city, but there was no longer any living being. The tens of thousands of living beings who originally lived here seemed to have been completely evaporated, and no trace could be found anymore. Ordinary people are destined to be reduced to the background under this big curtain. No one will care about their life and death, their happiness and anger, and no one will pursue it in future generations. In fact, the battle here in Kukan only lasted half a day. There were originally more than 70 big guys gathered here. It is said that relying on this long-running base, no matter how good the 500 Qin soldiers are in fighting, even if the so-called Qin army is no matter how exquisite and terrifying the formation is, it will not be able to directly defeat the city guarded by more than 70 bosses in just half a day. The real reason is actually because they were caught off guard. First, they were caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the Qin army. Second, they were caught off guard by this bloody and tragic war model in which big men would sacrifice themselves like small soldiers at any time. After all, the latest batch of big guys who came here have not really experienced the experience of fighting with the peak power of the indigenous people in this world. What they did after coming to this world was nothing more than cleaning up the battlefield and hunting them down. A fish slipped through the net, and compared to their predecessors, they are happier. But because of this, their mentality has not actually changed much. Originally, they may have thought it was a bad land or even a tomb where cruelty fell, but when they finally arrived, they found it quite relaxing and comfortable. It was this mentality and spirit that enabled the Qin army, which had been frustrated by Li Qi and the old man in a bamboo hat, to still defeat the opponent in front of him in the fastest and most violent way. People create gods according to their own ideas. For example, the gods in ancient Greek mythology also have conflicts and often create some family ethics dramas. For example, the judges of the underworld in Chinese legends actually have a very close relationship with the county magistrates. Big similarities. God is the transformation of human thinking, and what these big guys showed during this raid was genuine humanity. Some people know that there is no way to escape, and there is no place to run. Although the world is very big, just as they hunted the aboriginal fish that slipped through the net before, when they themselves became the target of hunting, at that time, there was a deeper despair. But some people still ran away. They knew it was wrong for them to run away, but when faced with a powerful enemy that was destined to be resisted with their blood and lives, they chose to retreat and remain contented. People who don't want to run can only run with others when they see others running away. Military defeats that have occurred in history are happening again and again here, and the underlying reasons have not changed. Radio cultivates listeners in a way of cultivating goo, but it does not have the reputation of justice. Radio is selfish and ruthless, and the listeners under its command have also perfectly inherited its style. This is a bit like the late Qing government. They thought we need to find ways to fight against the invasion from foreigners, but we are actually sitting from the perspective of an invader and cannot really issue a so-called real call. In the past, broadcasting did not bother to consider this kind of thing, because to it, the big guys were just products that could be continuously pushed out on the assembly line. No matter how low the price/performance ratio they created, it didn't matter to broadcasting. It was rich, it was affordable. However, under this situation, this is almost the most powerful combat group that broadcasting currently has, but it seems so vulnerable. For Su Fu and the Qin soldiers under his command, conquering the city in front of them was the easiest step, but their subsequent pursuit caused them considerable losses and difficulty. Kukan fell, and most of the big guys became deserters. They did not have the courage and persistence to rely on their original formations to resist and fight, but once they escaped and were alone or in twos and threes, they faced the Qin soldiers. During the chase, another side of the audience was inspired. When there is no way to retreat, audiences are often willing to go all or nothing. This is their instinct that they have experienced in the story world again and again. Story worlds before broadcasting rarely set up certain death situations. They need their listeners to break through from death again and again, rather than cripple them one by one. Lethal. Therefore, in the pursuit battle, the bosses who were trapped in a desperate situation seemed to have an iron-blooded aura instantly added to them, and they fought and struggled extremely fiercely. There were even many cases where they were pulled out after confirming that there was no possibility of escaping alive. He looked at the example of the Qin soldiers around him who blew themselves up. In this battle, when attacking Kukan, the Qin soldiers only lost no one, but in the pursuit battle, more than 20 soldiers died. After all, the bosses broke through from all directions, and you can't continue to hold on. To pursue the original formation, you have to spread out. In addition, Li Qi and the old man in the bamboo hat have injured dozens of Qin soldiers before, which can be regarded as greatly weakening the peak combat power of this Qin army. Under such a situation, battle losses are inevitable. Su Fu stood alone in the sky in Kukan. With his eyes closed, he took all the battles hundreds of miles nearby into his mind. He sent out instructions one after another. The death of every Qin soldier was unbearable for Su Fu. Heavy, because this is the last elite of Great Qin. He, Su Fu, wants to fly the black royal flag of Great Qin again in this world, but he definitely can't do it alone. Because the peak power of the natives of this world was indeed destroyed by the big guys sent one after another over the centuries by broadcasting, but broadcasting failed to come in as originally planned and control the world deeply and deeply. Transformation, and this world is larger and more populous than the earth. As long as they are given time to breathe, their underlying foundation and culture and even the so-called spiritual energy and laws of heaven and earth will still be there. In a few years, they will be born. The top strong man comes out. Su Fu is not a broadcaster. He knows that if he wants to truly colonize the world and restore the glory of the Qin dynasty, he will have to continue fighting here with the Qin army under his command for many years. But at this time, Su Fu was less able to withdraw his troops. Even if he dispersed to pursue, even in the face of constant losses, Su Fu could not choose to withdraw his troops. He is a wise man, and there is a reason why the first emperor chose him for this final decisive battle 2,000 years later. Su Fu knew that if he could not completely eradicate the roots this time, he would at least kill most of the audience, even if only 3 were left. 10 listeners survived and escaped. Then the next time they take action, this group of listeners will become particularly united. By then, it will be even more difficult to deal with, not to mention who knows when the darkness will send another group of listeners. Long-term pain is worse than short-term pain. The battle is still going on. As the scope of escape and pursuit becomes wider and wider, the impact of earth collapse and mountain rifts becomes wider and wider, but it also means that more and more listeners are killed. The fate of the boss, today. It has become very cheap and no longer valuable. Their anger, unwillingness, and roar can only be exchanged for helping someone to support them on the road. In fact, some big bosses are killed directly without even being able to support them in the end. The battle of 2 days and 2 nights finally came to an end. Su Fu ordered the withdrawal of troops. Although there were less than 10 big men who were seriously injured and broke through, they were no longer able to make a difference. Even if 10 people gathered together, the Qin army could charge with just one charge. If 20 or 30 people were to penetrate it, they would have to pay a high price. Amidst the vast sound of horns, Qin soldiers began to gather body. In this battle, a total of 30 Qin soldiers died, and most of their bodies were incomplete. After all, in a war of this level, it was difficult to preserve the whole body. Coupled with the wounded soldiers caused by Li Qi and the old man in the bamboo hat, more than 100 Qin soldiers are now seriously injured, and nearly half of them cannot be recovered in a short time. Unless the treasures of heaven and earth are found for treatment, it will take 3 to 5 years. It is difficult to regain the original peak strength within a short period of time. After all, they are not bosses, but evil stars created by the first emperor at the expense of tens of thousands of tigers. Even though they have extraordinary combat power, in many aspects, they are indeed not as complete as the real boss-level powerhouses. Under the Black King's flag, the Qin soldiers reorganized, and Ba's body was buried on the spot. This was the rule of the Qin soldiers. They fought and killed all the way, and the soldiers who died in the battle were buried in the area where they died. There was no need to bury them. Their bones were brought back to the country, because the place where they died in battle was the new territory of Qin. In this battle, although only 30 people died, nearly a quarter of the combat power was actually lost. The price was actually very low, but Su Fu knew that although there was no way to continue the steady flow of fire from the other side of darkness, send people to join the war, but darkness should still have some resources in its hands now. It depends on who can have the last laugh. Clang. At the sound of the trumpet, all the Qin soldiers hit their weapons on the ground heavily, making a uniform and solemn sound. Gale. 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 They were seeing off Bas. At the same time, I am also saying goodbye to myself. Because each of them knows in their hearts. This war. It's not finished yet. Even. The real decisive battle is here. It has just begun. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1052. You're haggard. Yan Huiyong looked at Chen Ryu standing in front of him and said. Chen Ryu is indeed a lot more haggard. It's not that her appearance has become older, but that the glint in her eyes that originally belonged to her is no longer visible. Standing behind her and looking at her back, she doesn't seem as sharp as before. Sharp, but became a bit wasted. Your concern makes me very uncomfortable. Chen Ryu's eyes were filled with frost, and she glanced at Yan Huiyong behind her. The location where the two of them were was where the aura of the train last appeared, but this time the train seemed to have failed to drive back safely. It was possible that something went wrong halfway. Can you open that channel? Yan Huiyong asked tentatively. After all, in today's audience circle, Chen Ryu should be the person with the highest attainments in formations. If she can't do anything, others may not be able to do anything either. If I can open this passage, then why don't I escape by myself? Chen Ryu responded. Yes, if she had the ability to open a world, why didn't Chen Ryu leave by herself? That's right, Yan Huiyong nodded. He knew that this woman was in a bad mood now and was a bit glassy. It seemed that after that incident, everyone in the audience was mocking her. However, it stands to reason that this woman's state of mind should not be so turbulent. With her original character and behavior, even if it is calling a deer a horse, she will continue to do it according to her own preferences. After all, she is the third person after Li Ji. Two Oriental listeners heading towards the west. Could it be that he was directly rushed by wealth that time? Yan Huiyong thought about it in his heart. Now it seems that it is very likely that Chen Ryu turned against Su Yuhang temporarily and chose to side with Su Yuhang. At that time, she was actually still high-spirited, and, at that time, she was also convinced that what Su Bai and the others were trying to do was hopeless. Not only her, but Yan Huiyong also thought so at the time. Even the fat monk and Buddha who chose to side with Su Bai didn't feel that they had much chance of winning. But the arrangement that Lao Fugui made 20 years ago appeared at that moment, and Chen Ryu was the first to bear the brunt. It would be interesting if your mood was bad because of old wealth. However, Yan Huiyong then thought about it. If this woman, whose combat prowess was so high that she could even catch up with Li Ji in terms of sheer strength, stagnated or even fell due to this, it would be even more disadvantageous for her when she went to that world to face those evil stars in the future. The relationship between enemies and friends changes too suddenly, and therefore, the perspective of thinking about things, or saying shit, has to be constantly changed and exchanged. I can only try to sense it a little bit. Chen Ryu took a deep breath. There might really be something wrong with that train. I've always been curious, that is, radio is in this world, so why is it that after radio sends listeners to that world, it can still control the listeners in that world? Yan Huiyong hasn't gone to that world yet, so he doesn't know the reason, but one thing is very clear. If the broadcast is not qualified to sanction the big guys there, those big guys who have gone to another world will not act stupidly. For the glory of broadcasting, he worked as cannon fodder and fought against the natives one after another. Because it's impossible for us to travel through the world, and our life level is not enough. Chen Ryu gave the answer she could think of, so, the broadcast train is said to transport generations of bosses there, but in fact, the gap between the world and the world is a chasm that cannot be crossed at all, even for people of our level. So I think that radio should be doing something to transport listeners across borders. For example, every listener who goes to that world is tied up in something, and it is even possible that something similar to the natal card is dropped. Under the control of radio, that is to say, radio holds the switch of life and death for each listener. This switch is even simpler than radio killing a big boss in this world. I don't know the specifics, I can only find out when we take the train there. This world is very big, but one big world and another big world are similar to a grain of dust in the vast universe. As for the gap and span between worlds, even now I can't get a glimpse of it. The reason why broadcasting can span from world to world should be that its life level or existence level has surpassed this limitation. Then, here's the question. Yan Huiyang shrugged. How did Qin Shi Huang send his 500 people to that world? I guess you have to ask Alexander about this. Alexander voluntarily fell before his empire was still capable of fighting. It is said that he taught broadcasting to play. Only then did the broadcasting consciousness actively seek the end of boredom and Suyuhang opportunity to rise to the top. But what kind of people can play together? Friend Yan Huiyang replied. It's a pity that Alexander and Zilong have both fallen for more than 2,000 years. How Alexander and broadcasting consciousness came into contact, and even how they became friends, have become an eternal secret. At this moment, there were waves of energy fluctuations in the air. The shadow of the train appeared and disappeared above, but it was never completely solidified. From this angle, it seemed as if the length of the train had been stretched to an infinite length. One end is in this world, the other end is in that world. Can you come back? Yan Huiyang said to himself. Even if he comes back, there won't be many people left. Still watching, Chen Ryu took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and tried her best to feel it. Unfortunately, although it seemed to be close in front of her, how far away was it actually? The distance of meaning is an unknown quantity to measure. In the distant sky, a girl wearing a white gauze skirt walked towards her. She was dressed very elegantly, and she even exuded an innocent atmosphere. Moreover, she was also a mixed race. The girl did not go to say hello to Chen Ryu and Yan Huiyang. She just stood there quietly, her eyes falling on the shadow of the train that appeared and disappeared above. She looks sweet, but her aloofness seems to run deep into her bones. Chen Ryu ignored her. Perhaps, a woman who was at a trough was not willing to face a woman who was on the rise. Yan Huiyang looked at the girl carefully. Western circles were also about crouching tiger, hidden dragon. He had never heard of her before, but now she is the only enlightened person in the entire West. It is said that she is a nun. But it seems that the repair is not that thorough. To the east, a blue light flew over, and a thin man stepped out of the blue light. The man's attitude was much better than that of the young nun who just came here. He smiled and greeted Chen Ryu and Yan Huiyang in turn. This man's name is Su Yunfei. His enlightenment is actually the same as that of Yan Huiyang, with some drama or luck. For example, Yan Huiyang became enlightened through wealth and wealth, while Su Yunfei attained enlightenment some time ago because of many pre-Qin relics. Transforming into Daigongzi and helping Su to build momentum, he received the inheritance from an alchemist from the pre-Qin period. It is said that the alchemist was probably one of the 4 Su Funa. In short, 4 of the 5 big guys in the world have gathered here. They are also waiting, because even they don't know whether the train can come back successfully. No one among the 4 people present asked why the remaining one didn't come. Perhaps, in the past, they didn't value Boss Liang so much, but since Boss Liang's outburst of momentum, no one dared to treat Boss Liang again. Any slight. It is normal for a person to be timid. It would be terrible for a person to be very strong, almost the strongest person today, but still be cowardly. Of course, the 4 bosses present would not know what they would think if they learned that Boss Liang was now learning to cook according to the recipes at home. Different from the tense atmosphere there, at this moment, Dolly's High Lake seemed very relaxed. The campfire karaoke session has ended and the tourists have dispersed. Subai, Hills, and Fatty are lying on the grass, looking at the night sky and the stars. It is said that the sea of stars is fake. It is an endless false proposition deliberately set up by the broadcast. Hills suddenly laughed. Maybe Subai took a sip of wine. Dabai, why don't we just go to Dali City to have some fun? Apparently, the fat man was a little lonely again. The monk is about to attain enlightenment, and you are just a low-ranking monk. Aren't you nervous at all? Subai pointed at the fat man and said angrily. Ha ha ha, it's probably too early for a monk to achieve enlightenment. Fatty, I have already understood the secrets of Taoism. If we wait to absorb those origins, we can advance. Besides, Taoism also pays attention to the balance of yin and yang. At this moment, the little guy who was leaning on Sudbai's leg suddenly turned sideways and stretched out his hand as if to grab Hill's leg. Hills had long noticed that this cute little guy had been staring at his legs. He immediately retracted his legs. The little guy pouted slightly, a little dissatisfied. Come on, baby, this is for you to play with. Hills conveniently threw the piece of jade ruyi he took from the fat man to the little guy, treating it as a toy temporarily lent to the child. The little guy held the still shining jade ruyi in his hand, opened his mouth slightly, put one end in his mouth and bit it. Unhygienic Sudbai stretched out his hand to separate the little guy's mouth from Yuruyi, but when Sudbai's hand touched Yuruyi, he felt that Yuruyi seemed a little hot, as if she had been bitten by the little guy. Because of this, at the same time, the essence stored in Yuruyi seemed to have gone crazy, and all of it began to flow crazily into Sudbai's body along Sudbai's palm. Sudbai stood up and wanted to shake Yuruyi away. After all, it belonged to Fatty and Hills, but Yuruyi seemed to have grown in his palm and he couldn't get rid of it at all. Hills on one side opened his mouth slightly, a little surprised. And the fat man over there almost cried. Damn it! Why is this happening again? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1053. This is not the first time this has happened to the fat man or the little guy. I remember that when the two of them first met and were purely scheming and exploiting each other, Fatty exchanged a drop of ancient vampire essence and blood with Sudbai for a veteran's magical weapon. At that time, Fatty was still complacent, but later when Sudbai successfully fused the essence, after the blood, the fat man knew the true value of that drop of blood and was so regretful that his intestines turned blue. With that drop of blood, it is no exaggeration to say that they, who were still ordinary listeners at the time, were fully qualified to rely on it to make transactions with high-level listeners. After this, of course, it was time to advance to the advanced audience. Fatty was busy from front to back, planning and calculating from the beginning, but in the end, because of Sudbai's kick, Jinjin hit the gold, and Jinjin actually chose to give Sudbai the opportunity to advance. This was the most injured Fatty had ever been, and it took him a long time to lick the wound. However, this time, it happened again. The fat man felt like crying, but it was a familiar rhythm and a familiar result. The remnant soul of Princess Jean, who was refined by him, once said that as long as he and Sudbai walked together, he would be destined to become Sudbai's stepping stone. Although Fatty no longer studied cause and effect, this kind of thing happened again and again. After the 3 incidents, he had become a little resigned to his fate and didn't even bother to resist. As for the little guy, he is a soul boy and has no fighting ability, but he is unusual. Maybe even he himself does not know what special abilities he has. The skin that Sudbai got was the skin that the little guy took advantage of. When Bai was asleep, he used his hands to frustrate it and directly integrated it into it. This was something Sudbai himself didn't expect or notice at the time. Right now, when Yuruyi was touched by the little guy and then touched by Sudbai, those essences poured into Sudbai's body like crazy. Sudbai really wanted to refuse, but couldn't. Something like the origin does not have a specific form. It is even similar to a curse in another sense. It is not so easy to deal with. At the moment, the only thing Sudbai can do is to let himself show it in his expression. He felt helpless and forced and tried not to bring more excitement to the fat man and Hills around him. With the influx of origin, Sudbai felt that his body that had lost its potential began to become full again at this time. Previously in Shijiazhuang, Subai took the initiative to kill his opportunity to advance in a short period of time in order to frighten other high-level listeners. He has exerted his strongest strength within a certain period of time. Now, he has made up for what he has lost through these sources. This feeling is very comfortable. It is your foundation and your future, just as the originally barren and cracked land is now irrigated with sufficient water. And the opportunity to advance, which I haven't felt for a long time, seems to have followed. Subai pushed the little guy gently, and the little guy was lifted up by a force and floated in front of the fat man. The fat man hugged the little guy. The little guy looked at his father, who seemed to be glowing, and was a little excited now. The fat man pressed his greasy face against the little guy's tender penis. "Uncle is feeling miserable." The little guy was a little surprised. He didn't know why this fat uncle was so sad at this time. Hills put his hands in his trouser pockets. He didn't feel any regret or reluctance because his origin was accidentally used by Subai. On the contrary, after the initial surprise, he seemed very indifferent. Crossing his hands gently, Hills showed a smile. "Advance, stop being coy." When Subai heard this, he nodded slightly. Then his breath suddenly increased. In an instant, the originally clear and clean high sea sky was immediately filled with dark clouds. Subai raised one hand. At this moment, his body seemed to be rejuvenated with new vitality, pregnant with majestic power. "Open it for me." A low cry came from Subai's throat, and the dark clouds began to press down, forming a black beam of light, all concentrated with the center of Subai's palm. Subai's body erupted with a crackle of joints. His soul and body had long been fused together during the second turn of the ancient zombie, so there was no distinction between soul and body at all. For Subai, the power of the soul also led to the power of the body, and the power of the body it will also carry out a kind of denial of one's own soul. The most terrifying thing about the third transformation of the ancient zombie created by Lao Fugui Tianzong based on Qin Bing's body training method is that he completely avoided the embarrassing imbalanced situation of other strengtheners who specialized in either the body or the soul. Of course there are people who practice both, but they can easily become mediocre. Therefore, most people who are intensifiers are similar to the fat man and the Buddha who take a single extreme route. The monk is considered a dual practitioner, but the monk's talent and his previous life the bonus is not something every listener can have. In the sky, the clouds rolled and relaxed, like a huge upside-down fountain. At this moment, the weather from heaven and earth seemed to pour into Subai's body. Subai closed his eyes, and he could feel that his body was constantly expanding. Although his body did not become huge, the energy that every blood vessel and even every cell could store was further enhanced at this time. Development. Even his own muscles, bones and bloodline have undergone obvious changes. This is a great improvement in the level of life. Every strong person is made of the materials of this world. Energy is actually always conserved. Of course, it is also in a cyclical process. The monk once discussed with Fatty how radio has turned the world into a situation similar to the Dharma-ending world, making human beings really mediocre. Except for listeners, ordinary people and society no longer have the ability to be similar to the people and gods of the Macedonian Empire and the Qin Empire in the past were traces of the exchange. In the end, the two people came to the conclusion that this world is originally a cycle. Strong people will be born and strong people will naturally fall. The strong people absorb the power of this world and occupy the resources of this world to achieve themselves. But when they after ashes return to dust, everything he originally occupied returned to this world. The cycle here not only refers to the cycle of pure material power, but also contains mysterious factors such as cause and effect, luck, and so on. The audience plan of the radio is like extracting a large amount of this power in advance, which is the first to squeeze this balance. A world plane is likely to be a big cycle, and when the radio sends batches of big guys to when another world is used as cannon fodder, it means that the group of people who occupy the largest resources are sent to another cycle, and because they died in another world, they cannot be absorbed back into this world. The existence of radio is a rule, which can also be understood as a kind of life, more like a kind of resident creature. It creates a story world and cultivates listeners, not relying on its own power, but drawing from this world. And now, the ancient zombie 3 turns, because it is a technique created by Lao Fuegui, does not mean that no one in the past has been more talented than Lao Fuegui, but because Lao Fuegui himself has his own specialness, and it was precisely because of this specialness back then. Because of sex, Mr. Zhao and Su Yuhang would kill the rich man. Subai, who inherited Lao Fuegui's legacy, could not inherit Lao Fuegui's status, but he inherited the skill. That is a more domineering plunder. More exaggerated plunder. It's not even about grabbing your things and declaring them mine. Instead, I point directly at you and say that everything you have belongs to me. The third level of ancient zombie showed his domineering power when Subai had just reached the second level. Subai relied on this to directly kill the high-level audience and bring them despair. And this time, as the life level further increases, the difficulty of Subai's plundering of the surrounding environment will be further reduced. In all directions. To myself. Take whatever you ask for. It was only when his strength got higher and the level of cultivation of the skill got higher and higher that Subai understood more and more deeply why the old rich man was tricked and killed by Su Yuhang in the first place. Subai can even imagine what level he can reach once he is allowed to continue on. Perhaps the only regret is that he is different from Fuegui, who is more special. For Subai, the higher the level of life, the difficulty of killing him will increase geometrically, and for the old Fuegui, once he succeeds in attaining enlightenment, it will be difficult to end Fuegui unless the broadcast breaks his own rules and destroys the world together. The presence. Because I understand, I become more aware of this fear. What kind of skill is this? Hills looked in admiration. It's too overbearing. I used to think that the skill was something external, not even as valuable as my own blood. But his technique is almost a bloodline, and even transcends bloodline. The fat man was holding the baby next to him, swaying aggrievedly. Hearing what Hills said, he felt even more speechless. Damn it, our things have been used by others, and you are still here sighing. You are out of your mind. Have a problem, brother. What kind of skill is this? The third level of ancient zombie Fatty replied, but don't think about it, others can't practice it. Dabai also relied on his godfather to pave the way to eliminate the side effects. Well. Hills fell into silence, and then said slumpily, you know, I am a noble, so for a long time, I have been proud of my noble status. But now I suddenly discovered. In front of him. It seemed as if his origins were all worthless. Being able to compete with Dad is also a skill. The fat man said sourly. Then he looked down at the little guy in his arms. The fat man felt increasingly unbalanced. He had just seen it because Yuruyi had a violent reaction when she passed the little guy's hand and touched Subai. Damn, it's a skill that the father is more valuable than the son. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1054. Hiss. In the dim light, Subai slowly opened his eyes. In his eyes, there was a dark red deep in the pupil of the left eye, and an abyss-like suffocating black deep in the right eye. This represented Subai's two bloodlines, vampires and zombies. This was a sign shown long ago after the two major bloodlines merged, but this time, there was an extra depth in these eyes. At this moment, it was as if the old rich man's eyes were reappearing on Subai. But just a few seconds later, Subai's eyes began to slowly return to their original appearance, deliberately giving up the state just now, although the feeling of that state was really great. It's not that Subai has some ridiculous reserve in his heart, but because Subai knows that the old rich man has indeed paved the way for him, but if he continues to be stupid or even willing to just follow this road, the final result will be it is very likely that he will gradually become the shadow of the old rich. In the end, how can a puppet have his own way if it affects his own enlightenment? Maybe, Lao Fugui doesn't want to see such an ending. The light on his body began to slowly dissipate, and the dark clouds in the sky also disappeared in an instant. When Subai's feet landed on the ground, he seemed to feel the pulsating frequency from the earth under his feet in an instant. Mountains and rivers have spirits. Mountains and rivers have energy. They are intangible and elusive, and have always been regarded as the biggest research topic by metaphysicians. Subai stretched out his hand and raised it gently. In an instant, a light blue circle of light appeared in Subai's palm. This was the essence and aura of Urhai Lake. It was the spirit of the creator, but it was destroyed by Subai. Bai was caught so easily. Wow, Hills exclaimed, "It's amazing." The fat man's eyes lit up. Damn it, metaphysicians have been able to eat and drink for thousands of years just by being able to find these chi veins. Now Dabai can just grab the chi and water veins of the mountains. What the hell is he going to do? Became an immortal? Subai opened his mouth, as if he wanted to swallow the stuff, but he frowned temporarily. It was not because he was worried that swallowing the Urhai Lake would cause the beautiful scenery here to decline, but because of this, if you swallow it, you will be involved in too much cause and effect. Not only the people who live here, but also the creatures near Urhai Lake and even the things that happened here for thousands of years, all the cause and effect will be connected to you. In the end, Subai smiled. It seemed that this thing could only be used in the future battle of life and death. Otherwise, it would be like adding a tortoise shell that could not be broken. By then, he would just have to study and figure out how to use it. It is very difficult to remove those causes and effects. Turning his palm down, this ball of light returned to where it should be, and Hills also walked up at this time. It's amazing, very unexpected. The fat man was in a daze. He was thinking that if Subai could grab dozens of mountain water veins for him and melt them into the talisman paper, how exaggerated would the talisman paper's effect be? Unfortunately, this matter is destined to be impossible to complete. For Subai, this kind of thing is more like a secret method, which is based on the change in the understanding of the world when the third level of the ancient zombie is about to be completed, and the change in the world's relationship to his status. Every time you use it, you have to pay a high price. Most advanced listeners and even veterans actually have similar methods. No one is willing to use it until the moment of real life and death. Therefore, for Subai, whether eating or borrowing these things, it was a huge consumption and pressure. He took the little guy from the fat man's arms and yawned. Tonight, he first sang and played, and then watched his father shine. It had been a long day, and the little guy was a little tired. "I'm sorry, you too." Subai expressed his apology without making too many gestures. "Since you have taken advantage of this kind of thing, it would be meaningless to do anything false. I don't mind very much, it just delayed my pace of enlightenment for a while." Hills smiled. He seemed very gentleman at this time. "Also, I suddenly felt that I should reconsider. Let's take a look at the way of my own enlightenment, because nowadays, enlightenment is no longer a situation of narrow escape, but a starting point. There are also strong and weak levels among the boss levels, and I don't want to be the first to die after going to that place. I don't want to have to rely on your protection to survive after I get there." Subai looked at the fat man, who immediately raised his hand. "Do not talk." The fat man knocked on his chest with his fisted hand. "I am used to it." The fat man felt very bitter, but he didn't know how to say it. He couldn't just go away without saying goodbye again like before, right? He is not a little girl of 15 or 16 who likes to have a bad temper. He always likes to run away from home when something happens, and he is too embarrassed to be fat. The impact of Sudbai's advancement to the advanced audience level is actually not very big, because when he was at the intermediate level, he could fight or even kill some high-level audience members alone. Now that he has advanced to the advanced level, it is a kind of belated what comes when conditions are ripe. Under the current situation, only who is newly promoted to a big boss may become truly eye-catching news. Of course, the news must have its freshness. As the only remaining big boss in the past, Boss Liang naturally received all the attention. Eyes and attention. Now as the number of big guys continues to increase, the freshness is constantly changing. Back at the place of enlightenment, the monk and the Buddha were already floating in the underworld. They were relying on the resentful souls in the underworld to hone their Buddhist hearts. At the same time, they may also be trying to transform them and increase their own merits. Sudbai didn't know what merit was. According to his understanding, it was probably a psychological suggestion of I am compassionate or I am kind. When such psychological suggestions continue to accumulate, they will develop from quantitative changes to qualitative changes. Sudbai put the little guy to rest in the coffin where he had slept before. Sometimes Sudbai felt that his son was really easy to take care of. If other children were thrown into the coffin, they would have been frightened and cried. But the little guy has even seen the demon cave, so this place can only be regarded as pediatrician. The fat man was sitting on the altar, bored. When he learned from Sudbai that the so-called mountain veins could not be mass-produced, he seemed a little discouraged. This wave, blood loss. Sudbai didn't bother him anymore. It was obvious that Fatty needed some peace and quiet. Among the four of them, only Fatty was still a beginner, so he would naturally be under greater pressure. Moreover, he had given him the origin that he was planning to use to advance. After using it, it would be a blow to the fat man. Hills teleported back to the western land of enlightenment. After all, the chaos of demons there should be over, but I don't know how many tombstones can still remain active. This time in the western land of enlightenment, it was basically destroyed, but as a former guardian, Hills still had the obligation to clean up the mess. Then, Sudbai was left leaning against the coffin, gently tapping the coffin wall with his fingers, knocking out a simple nursery rhyme. If we change the scene to an ordinary home, a father holds a cattail leaf fan and drives his son to hum a song. The child is lying in the cradle enjoying the majesty and singing and is entering a sweet dreamland. It seems that this is more relevant. A few hours later, when Sudbai was feeling sleepy and about to take a nap, a corpse whose lower body was covered with bones suddenly crawled towards the place. This is the first time that Sudbai has seen a creature in the underworld climb out of the underworld on its own. This is something that is not allowed by the rules of the Enlightenment land, and it is also not allowed by the underworld. There are still some rotten cloth strips left on this corpse. It can be seen that he must have been a person of high status during his lifetime, because he was actually wearing some silver and gold wear on his finger bones. Sudbai was not in a hurry to crush the skeleton directly, but watched with interest as it slowly crawled over and approached him. Bye-bye. Wankai opened his mouth, his voice was a little hoarse. Obviously, he didn't seem to have the ability to speak normally. Monk, a look of surprise appeared on Sudbai's face. Did it work? But, I just transformed into one. The tone of the wreckage's words was completely that of a monk. Now I am very curious about Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's oath that he will never become a Buddha until hell is empty. Is it a feeling of compassion for heaven and earth, or does it have other purposes? All living beings have Buddhas, all living beings are Buddhas, Buddha is one, and Buddhas are also billions and billions. Therefore, as long as the Buddha nature in that person's heart is ignited, then it will be the Buddha's walk in the world. Can I understand it as a higher level of body seizing? Sudbai looked at the skeleton carefully, and the other person only exuded the aura of a low-level audience. Integrate into my Buddha and enter the bliss. This is doing good deeds and accumulating virtue, the wreckage continued to explain. Don't quarrel with a monk, especially if it's a quarrel where you communicate politely and purely by mouth, because you simply can't win against this thick and black monk. The wreckage crawled back to the underworld again. Subai was looking forward to it. If the Buddha monk could really transform all the resentful souls in the underworld, would these two people be able to directly achieve enlightenment? Subai walked to the fat man again, who was still sitting on the altar and counting the steps. Don't be depressed. After I achieve enlightenment, you can make the tombstone in the Eastern Enlightenment land. That's what I've been waiting for. The fat man's face immediately turned gloomy. Boom. Suddenly, a majestic spiritual pressure swept over. This is a kind of pressure that only senior people and above can feel. The train finally came back successfully, Fatty murmured. No, Subai shook his head, it fell. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1055. The color of the cafe is burgundy, and few cafes are decorated in this color. When Subai opened the door and walked in, he was a little surprised. Hill seemed familiar. Before that, Subai had not expected that as an Englishman, Hills would have so many friends in China. In other words, there are so many friendships. The location where the train crashed is on the side of the cliff, but we don't need to worry. Let the big guys explore the way first. There is always time for a cup of coffee. Hill snapped his fingers and died. The female boss with red shawl hair came over with a menu and communicated with Hills in English. The two have a close relationship and may even have had negative distance contact. This is a famous mountain scenic spot in Guizhou. The train that crashed yesterday was in this area. Of course, the train incident did not have any impact on the lives of ordinary people. Subai believed that even if the train collapsed half of the cafe, the female boss will continue to open the door and do business the next day as if nothing is wrong. Broadcasting has been very successful in this regard. For ordinary people, you can only see what the broadcast allows you to see, and you can know only what the broadcast allows you to know. It is like a wall surrounding this place, and all living beings are surrounded by it. In it, only the audience is considered an outlier, because they can climb the wall. The female boss went down to prepare coffee, and the tenderness in her eyes could not be concealed. Seeing that Subai was looking at him with amusement, Hills immediately shrugged. I don't know why you are so surprised that I like women. Su, you know very well that you are sexually indifferent, but I am a normal man and I have my basic needs. I didn't say anything. Subai took a sip of water first. She used to study in the UK, and I was obsessed with Chinese culture before I became a listener. Then I met her, and my relationship with her was like the Titanic. Hills had no intention of further telling his love story, and Subai was not interested in hearing the story. Yesterday, the train crashed. Buddha and the monk still had to float in the underworld. The monk had to go back to the small temple to continue staring at the Sanking statue. The little guy was taken back by the fat man, where there was good luck and good luck. After a while, the coffee was served, but the coffee in front of Subai was a thick blood color. If it weren't for the fragrant smell, Subai would have mistakenly thought that the other party was bringing him a glass of plasma. I specially asked her to make it, flaming red lips. I think you should like it. Hill supported his chin with both hands and looked at Subai. Check it often, her coffee can be tasted by a noble blood clan. It's an honor for her and this coffee. I haven't drank blood for a long time. Subai picked up the cup and took a sip. It was smooth in the mouth, with the fragrance of roses, and not greasy at all. Not bad. The vampires drink blood not only to survive, but just like ordinary people eating, it not only has the meaning of survival, but also carries much more. Hills put a few pieces of sugar in his coffee. Sue, I've been thinking about something since yesterday. I'm not interested in hearing what's going on in your heart. You can tell me the result directly. You are really not a good listener. Hills waved his hand. I decided to change the way I preach. This will delay the date of my sermon, but I think it will make me stronger in the future. Congratulations. I still have to thank you. I'm really sorry about this. After all, I used your origin. Subai said this sincerely. After all, although the origin was created by the fat man, it almost destroyed the entire Western Enlightenment place. Actually, at our level, it seems that many things every day often turn into a philosophical problem. Hills leaned his back on the sofa. This is really interesting. From now on, every dead listener will have a tombstone. You can add a label of humanity's great thinker, philosopher, educator to everything. The sunshine in the winter afternoon brought a kind of dampness and coldness, which was not very comfortable. The two of them chatted wordlessly, drank coffee, and sat here, which was a way to pass the time. Until almost 2 o'clock, a familiar figure to Subai appeared outside the window. In other words, it was not Subai and Hills who waited for him, but he found Subai and Hills. The other party's dressing style today seems a bit mature. He wears a black down jacket and velvet jeans. It doesn't look like the free and easy style he always likes. It looks like an ordinary person coming home from get off work. Even his demeanor is exactly the same. Hills also saw the other party. At their level, the next step is to achieve enlightenment, so they are not so frightened towards the big boss. Hills smiled directly and said, "Su, each of your Eastern bosses seems to be more ordinary than the other? In Chinese, it seems to be called down to earth. Well, it's a new trend." Subai felt that it was probably the influence of the old rich man on Yan Huiyang, which caused some changes in Yan Huiyang's mood. He was no longer so bold and unrestrained, and began to return to his original nature. Yan Huiyang walked in and sat down next to Subai. He looked at Subai and smiled. A rough man suddenly smiled stupidly at you. Anyone would immediately get goosebumps. If you don't go there and take a look, why do you still have time to drink coffee? Subai asked in confusion when he saw Yan Huiyang unceremoniously taking the flame-red lips in front of him and drinking it. Of course, the confusion here is not true. After all, the reason why Subai and Hills arrived early and drank coffee here instead of going to the specific location was because they were worried about an accident. After all, everyone knew that that train was probably the one broadcasting to pick up the remaining big guys there, and there was an accident on this train midway. God knows whether those Qin soldiers would take this train directly. Take a train and come back together and then launch a big counterattack. At this time, it is very likely that whoever rushes to the front will die first. As for the big brother's inheritance and magical weapons, they are really not that attractive to Subai and Hills now. They are not as coveted as they were when they were seniors. Wait for everyone to arrive. Yan Huiyang didn't have any heirs, and he had a very good relationship with Subai. They knew each other originally, and they had similar temperaments to a certain extent. In addition, they were old and wealthy, so even though they were dating, not much, but at least we can treat each other as friends. Hills motioned to the female boss for another cup of coffee. The big guys are scared too then, Hills made his own taunt. Yan Huiyang didn't show any anger at all, but responded calmly. There might be corpses of big guys in the train. In that world, the status of the bosses has been equivalent to cannon fodder for a long time, and this group of people originally thought that their dawn was coming, but in the end they became cannon fodder. Therefore, it is natural for Boss Liang not to want to go to that world. In order not to go to the high-level audience, he even made a clone to suppress his own realm and delay the sermon. People are timid, but they can see clearly and truly. Now it seems that the grass on the grave of those people who laughed at him in the first place has begun to sprout. Are they all dead? Subai then asked. That's right. If they were still alive, they would have come out by now. The train crashed into the cliff and has been silent since then. If the big guys returning inside are still alive, why don't they come out? Could it be that he was pulled into the story world by the broadcast? Hills guessed, Go directly into the story world and repair the injuries. Yan Huiyang shook his head. Even if the radio wants to use this method to help them recover, it is impossible to draw them into the story world before we see them. Hills and Subai looked at each other. Obviously, Yan Huiyang, as a big boss, was already qualified to have access to some things. For example, Subai and Hills were very concerned about why the gang of bosses who were sent out were there. The other world will continue to be controlled and threatened by broadcasts, forcing them to actively become cannon fodder. There is a big difference between a world plane and a world plane. It has its own autonomy and exclusivity, just like an internal circulation system. It instinctively resists external factors from affecting its own circulation. Therefore, although broadcasting relies on trains to send the bosses there, it will baptize the bosses in the middle, without changing their strength or anything else. The only thing that needs to be left behind is actually the life of the bosses themselves. Something like a card. This can be understood as smugglers and stowaways. The smuggler takes their identity documents and then blackmails and threatens the stowaways. Once the stowaway fails to comply, the smuggler can reveal that person's identity, and then the stowaway will be deported. I don't know the specific way of doing this in broadcasting, but the principle should be similar. But once the audience's identity is revoked, they will immediately be ostracized from that world plane. The whole world rejects you, and you will be crushed and annihilated in an instant, because no matter how strong you are, you cannot resist a world. This is the means by which broadcasting drives the big guys in that world to continue serving him. Of course, after these people come back, their identities must be re-authenticated. This is based on the operating rules of radio. At least a listener must stand in front of the returning boss. Then the broadcast confirms the identity of the boss through the eyes and ears of the listener and information from other channels, and then that boss will be relisted. Register it, and then the broadcast can pull it into the story world. Just like the bloody corpse back then. At this time, a blue light floated into the cafe, spread out into a barrier, and Boss Liang appeared inside. Are you bothered by all of you calling me one by one? In the picture, Boss Liang is wearing an apron and seems to be cooking in the kitchen, looking very impatient. Yan Huiyang took a deep breath. Although Boss Liang was very unconventional, Yan Huiyang still showed his respect. Brother Liang, you should know that this train. I don't have time to worry about trains or not. I'm preparing dinner. We're going to celebrate the festival tonight. It's the last time in my life to celebrate this festival.